something important is quietly developing around the Philadelphia Eagles roster, and it revolves around a position that suddenly became one of the most intriguing questions for this team moving forward: the safety spot. For the last few seasons, that role next to the starting defensive backs has had some level of stability, but now the situation looks very different, and it's forcing the organization to think carefully about what comes next. The Eagles may seriously need to consider bringing in a veteran safety through a trade, especially with the role that Reed Blankenship has held since 2022, now needing a real replacement. Right now, the conversation starts with the reality of the roster. The Eagles are looking at a secondary that already has several young pieces in place, including Drew Makuba. The talent is there, but the experience in that room is becoming a real concern. When you look ahead to the 2026 NFL Draft, there is a lot of excitement about the safety class. It's considered deep, with legitimate prospects expected to go on day 1, day 2, and even into day 3. Because of that, the Eagles could absolutely use one of their early selections on a safety prospect. They currently hold 4 picks within the first 3 rounds, all inside the top 100 overall selections, which gives them flexibility. But here's the key question the organization has to answer. Do they really want to enter the season relying on a rookie safety and a second-year player as their primary starters? It's possible, and some teams have done it successfully. However, there's a strong argument that the Eagles would prefer at least one veteran presence back there. Right now, the idea of Sidney Brown being the most experienced player in the room is something that could make the front office uncomfortable. Experience matters at safety, especially in a defense with championship aspirations. The challenge is that the free agent market is drying up quickly. Many of the recognizable names have already signed with other teams. Safeties like Jaquan Brisker, CJ Gardner-Johnson, and Jalen Hawkins are already off the board. Others such as Nick Cross and Alohi Gilman have also found new homes. When you see that many options disappear early in free agency, it naturally pushes teams to start looking at the trade market instead, and that's where things get interesting. One of the most intriguing names that could potentially be available is Jesse Bates from the Atlanta Falcons. Bates has quietly been one of the most productive safeties in football for years, especially when it comes to creating turnovers. He has consistently been one of the league's best ball hawks at the position. When you look at his numbers, the consistency is remarkable. Since entering the league in 2018, he has recorded at least 3 interceptions in almost every single season of his career, with the lone exception coming in 2021. That level of production is incredibly rare. Even more impressive is how steady his play has remained over the last few years. In 2023, he recorded 6 interceptions for Atlanta. In 2024, he followed that up with 4. Last season, he added 3 interceptions and even returned 1 for a touchdown. That kind of playmaking ability could immediately change the dynamic of the Eagles' secondary. Now, the obvious question is why the Falcons would even consider trading a player like that. Bates is only 29 years old, which means he's not at the end of his career. However, there are a couple of factors that could make a deal possible. His salary cap hit is significant, and he only has 1 year remaining on his current contract. If Atlanta believes he may not re-sign long-term, they could explore trade options rather than risk losing him later. For the Eagles, a move like that could make sense. They have been creating cap flexibility, and if they really wanted to, they could potentially restructure or extend a deal to manage the money. It wouldn't be a typical long-term investment for a player approaching 30, but as a short-term impact addition, Bates would be extremely intriguing. There are also other possibilities out there. One name that has been involved in trade speculation for years is Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals. Baker is now over 30, but he remains an effective defensive leader and playmaker. Arizona has been in a rebuilding phase, and with a new regime in place, this could finally be the moment where they decide to move on from him. If that happened, the Eagles could at least explore the idea of bringing him in as a veteran presence. And then there's the kind of scenario that would qualify as a true blockbuster idea. It may sound far-fetched, but when you're talking about Howie Roseman, you can never completely rule anything out. If the Eagles ever considered a massive trade involving A.J. Brown, a team like the Los Angeles Chargers could theoretically become part of the conversation. The Chargers have talent on both sides of the ball, and one defensive player who could change the entire discussion is Derwin James. Imagine a secondary that includes Drew Makuba alongside Derwin James, with cornerbacks like Quinyon Mitchell and Tariq Woolen also in the mix. That kind of defensive backfield would immediately become one of the most dangerous groups in the NFL. Now, to be clear, a star-for-star trade like that isn't something the Eagles typically do, and the salary cap details alone could make it difficult. But the fact that these kinds of possibilities even exist shows just how many different directions the Eagles could go. The bigger point here is simple. The Eagles know they need to do something at safety. Whether it's through the draft, free agency, or a trade, that position cannot be left unanswered. Even if they select a safety early in the draft, having a veteran with starting experience would give this defense stability and leadership. And when you look at the bigger picture of the roster, this decision could shape how the Eagles approach the rest of the offseason. If they solve the safety position with a trade, it changes the entire draft strategy. If they don't, then one of those early picks may almost have to be used on a defensive back. So now the big question becomes, should the Eagles aggressively pursue a veteran safety through a trade, or should they trust the draft and build that position with young talent instead? What do you think the team should do? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But when you really step back and look at the bigger picture of the Philadelphia Eagles roster right now, the safety situation is only one piece of a much larger puzzle that the front office is trying to solve during this offseason. The team has already made several moves, and while some fans might feel the Eagles have been relatively quiet compared to other teams around the league, there is actually a very clear strategy behind what Howie Roseman has been doing. So far, the Eagles have addressed a few key areas. They brought in cornerback Riq Woolen, a player with tremendous physical tools who has already flashed high-level play earlier in his career. They also added edge rusher Arnold Ebiketie, a former second-round pick who has quietly been one of the more productive pass rushers in football over the last couple of seasons. On top of that, they signed Johnny Munt, a tight end known primarily for his blocking ability, which fills a role the Eagles needed badly at that position. Along with those additions, the organization also extended the contracts of Jordan Davis and Grant Calcaterra, continuing to secure important pieces of the roster for the future. When you list all those moves together, it becomes clear that the Eagles haven't been inactive at all. They've simply been very selective. And that approach makes sense when you consider the financial reality of this roster. The Eagles already have one of the highest payrolls in the NFL. They are paying several stars on offense who are in their prime, and they're also beginning to commit serious money to defensive players who are entering their prime as well. Because of that, this isn't an offseason where the Eagles can simply go out and spend massive amounts in free agency the way some rebuilding teams can. You look around the league and see teams like the Raiders or the Commanders making aggressive moves and handing out huge contracts. The Eagles were never going to operate that way this year. Their strategy is different, and it's one we've actually seen them follow before. Instead of targeting expensive veterans late in their careers, the Eagles have started to lean toward a different type of signing. The blueprint has become very clear. Find younger players who were once highly drafted, players who have already shown flashes of elite potential in the NFL, but who for one reason or another are not currently at peak market value. Then bring them in on short-term deals that are low risk but have the potential for high reward. That's exactly what the Eagles have done with players like Riq Woolen and Arnold Ebiketie. Woolen, for example, was once a Defensive Rookie of the Year finalist back in 2022. Even though his career since then has had some ups and downs, he has still shown elite traits in coverage. When analysts break down advanced metrics such as man coverage snaps and yards allowed per target, Woolen still ranks near the very top of the league in several categories. That tells you the raw ability is still there. Ebiketie is another fascinating example. Last season with the Atlanta Falcons, he wasn't even the primary pass rusher in their rotation, yet his efficiency numbers were outstanding. He finished the year with one of the highest pressure rates among edge rushers in the entire league. From weeks 12 through 18, he actually led the NFL in pressure rate. That's the kind of hidden production that teams like the Eagles love to identify and develop further. What makes these moves even more interesting is the price. Ebiketie's deal is worth just over $7 million for the season, and only a portion of that is guaranteed. In a league where elite pass rushers are being paid $25 to $30 million per year, that kind of contract represents incredible value. If he produces at a high level, the Eagles benefit tremendously, and if it doesn't work out, the financial risk is minimal. That's the essence of the Eagles' current strategy. They're not chasing the most expensive names on the market. Instead, they're targeting talented players whose value might be slightly slightly lower than it should be, betting that their system and coaching staff can unlock their best performance. At the same time, the front office is still keeping an eye on several other positions that could need reinforcement. Wide receiver is one of them, even though the roster still technically includes A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. There are questions about the depth behind them. Adding a third receiver could become an important move, especially if the team wants to maintain flexibility heading into the draft. There are still some intriguing names available who could fill that role. Players like Darnell Mooney, Jawan Jennings, Hollywood Brown, and even veterans such as Brandon Cooks could all provide experience and playmaking ability in the passing game. The Eagles might not need a superstar at that spot, but having another reliable target could become very important over the course of a long season. And then of course there's the situation at tight end. Dallas Goedert has been an important part of this offense for years, and there is growing expectation that the Eagles could work toward a contract extension to keep him in Philadelphia. Locking down a key offensive weapon like that would help bring stability to the offense as the team continues building around its core players. When you connect all these dots together, you start to see the bigger picture of what the Eagles are doing this offseason. They're carefully balancing the salary cap, reinforcing key positions with smart signings, and leaving themselves flexible enough to attack the draft in multiple ways. But everything still circles back to that original question about the safety position, because no matter how strong the rest of the roster looks, the Eagles cannot afford to enter the season with uncertainty in the middle of their secondary. Whether that solution comes through a trade for someone like Jesse Bates or Budda Baker, through a veteran signing, or through a high draft pick, the front office knows that decision is coming soon. And if they get that move right, it could quietly become one of the most important decisions of the entire offseason for this team. And another layer of this conversation that Eagles fans should really pay attention to is how all of these potential moves connect to the overall identity the team is trying to maintain. The Philadelphia Eagles are not rebuilding, they are operating as a contender that already has a very expensive core in place. That reality changes the way every roster decision is made. When a team is in that position, the front office can't afford to miss on the small moves. The blockbuster deals get the headlines, but it's often the depth signings and the strategic additions that determine whether a roster remains elite over the course of an entire season. And that's exactly why the safety situation has become such an important topic internally. Right now, the defense already has several pieces that the organization clearly believes in. The secondary includes young talent like Drew Makuba and cornerback Reek Woolen, who the team recently added because of the upside he has already shown earlier in his career. If Woolen plays anywhere near the level he flashed during his early seasons, he can become a huge piece of this defense moving forward. But even with that potential, there is still a missing element: experience at the safety position. That's why the idea of exploring trades continues to make so much sense. A veteran like Jesse Bates would immediately bring leadership and ball hawking ability to the back end of the defense. The interception numbers alone show how disruptive he can be. Very few safeties have been as consistent at taking the football away over the last several seasons. Another name that keeps resurfacing in discussions is Budda Baker. Even though he's now past the age of 30, his leadership and versatility are exactly the type of traits that defensive coordinators love to have on the field. If a team like Arizona were willing to move him, the Eagles would at least have to consider making a call. And then there's the kind of scenario that would completely shake the NFL if it ever happened. Imagine a deal that somehow involves